Hello, and welcome to today's episode of 52 Weeks of Health Equity with Conscious by Us. I am your host, Tahisha Timmons, and our plan is to have 52 conversations with a variety of guests about the state of health, improving it, and why health equity matters to all of us. So, according to the CDC, health equity is the state in which everyone has a fair and just opportunity to attain their highest level of health. And today we have as our guest, Melonya Johnson, who is a coach. She's a trainer and consultant, strategist. She's a public speaker, and she is also the owner of Be Smart Coaching. She is not just a colleague, but also a friend. And I consider her a mentor when it comes to the space of emotional intelligence, strategy, and just really a thought leader when we think about communities. And so, Melania, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can kind of give even a better intro for who you are and why you're qualified kind of to talk about our topic today, which is health education in urban schools, how all of the different pieces come into play when we talk about healthy living from pre-K to the 12th grade, so before you go to college.
Great.
So
Thank you. I am excited to be here. Thank you for the introduction. Again, I'm Melonya Johnson. My company is Be Smart Coaching, and I'm a leadership development practice. And I am a professional certified coach. I'm certified as a social and emotional intelligence coach. I'm certified in DISC assessment, certified as an intercultural development inventory practitioner, and also certified as a pro-sci change management practitioner. In our practice, we really focus on four areas. We focus on helping individuals, managers, and leaders build competencies in the areas of social and emotional intelligence, intercultural competency, as well as building savvy communication skills and exemplary behavioral practices in terms of their management skills. So that's what we focus on, and we do that so that we can create best places to work environments where people feel psychologically, physically safe, where they can feel fully engaged and engaged in their work and engaged in what they do, as well as build loyalty towards doing an excellent job and loyalty towards their company. So that's what I do. That's why I'm here, and I think that our conversation today is exciting, and I'm excited to get started.
well, and Melania, we you tend to be my person that I call when I often need to like think through things. So when I started on this journey to make a podcast, I couldn't think of a better person to have to talk about high level thought leadership in the health education or the health equity space when we look at education as one of those components in the social determinants that impact our access and our ability to have equity when it comes to health. So, what's the one compelling idea that you want to share with us around this particular space? Because you have worked with organizations in the past that focus in this area, and I know from talking with you that's sort of why you sort of wanted to share a little bit about like getting people a good start almost, and where are we with that when it comes to education. So what's the burning idea that we really should be thinking about when we think about health equity and those who are pre-K through 12
Mhm.
and education?
Yeah, I've worked in the nonprofit arena for many years. I've worked in some sides of the healthcare industry and nonprofit. I've worked in, I work with, in terms of my business, I've worked with schools and school systems. And so um, I, I, I'm, I'm old fashioned in the sense that I grew up with the belief that education was our ticket out. And I think that our education system, especially when you're talking about um, city schools, under resourced schools, I think that there needs to be a holistic approach. And it's not just mind, it's also body. When I think about the real inequities that exist for African Americans and people of color in the healthcare industry, it makes me understand that we have to be advocates for ourselves. Well, how do you start that? How do you begin that conversation? How do you have an awareness that you are responsible for your health? And I believe that it starts with education. I think it can start in pre-K, learning some habits, learning some information about your culture, your background, how health is wealth, how it's important to maintain healthy bodies. And I believe that you can start educating students as well as parents, early on so that they become lifelong habits of health and prevention.
And so, that's really important having that lifelong habit of prevention. And you mentioned prevention. And um, I just want to kind of go into a little bit more depth around prevention. Is, when we think about health, you can't think about health without thinking that healthcare is going to be the answer to issues with your health and wellness, right? And so I've heard that from patients before, having a background in nursing, that like, why don't we just have a pill? Like, why can't we just, as a healthcare um practitioners, just fix whatever is wrong with people? And you mentioned like prevention and getting into a mindset of healthiness. And so what programs have you seen when you've worked with schools or organizations that are focused on prevention? Because I know we think we're focusing on prevention, but when I really think about prevention programs that are out there for kids, I'm not sure if I can think of any off the top of my head, other than, yeah, I really can't think of too many.
I think there is not a unified approach to when it comes to educating ourselves about our bodies and our health. I mean, stop to think about it. When you go to a doctor or a new doctor, one of the first things they ask you is about your history, your family history, right? And you fill out that information. It gets on my nerves every time I do it, but then you never hear anything about it. There's never any talk about, wow, you know what, diabetes, hypertension run in your family. You're going to really have to watch your weight. Your nutrition is going to be important for you. Just because it runs in your family, it doesn't mean that you have to contract these chronic diseases. And so I believe that when you are looking at these schools that are in under-resourced communities, right? Oftentimes they're in food deserts. They don't have access to fresh vegetables and fresh fruits and things of that nature, that when you have taken on the responsibility, and I don't say it's right that the school has to do that, but they've taken on the responsibility of providing meals for 2 out of 3 meals for students, that you also take into consideration the realities of the communities that they come from. And let me give you an example. And let's just look at nutrition. There was a school in New York State that had to apologize because at the beginning, the first day of African American History Month, they decided to have a meal of fried chicken, waffles, and watermelon. And people became incensed by that because it was so stereotypical. When I think about you, I think about the word performative. You really drove that word home for me. And these are sort of performative things that people might do or schools might do in order to, try to address the culture of the folks that they serve. But here's the thing: if you want to really be inclusive, this is where diversity and inclusion hits the rubber meets the road. You look at these communities and say, wow, we've got an epidemic of children who are obese. And in the African American community, 12 to the 2 to 19-year-old children, 24.2 children are obese. In the Hispanic community, 25.6 are obese. So, what can we do in terms of, when we provide a meal for our children, we're going to give them some nutritional information. Start to train them to look at, first of all, to understand what whole foods are and what processed foods are. But when you are looking at a label for something, how many calories are in it? How much sodium is in it? How many carbs are in it? How much fiber is in it? Are there any vitamins in it? Is this food nurturing you? We don't develop a relationship with food, and what it does for our bodies. And so these are areas that we can start to help kids to understand. But you can also provide meals that don't add to the weight gain, as well as, if you're dealing with folks that tend to have diabetes, then don't serve heavy carb meals. We're going to give you potatoes, and then we're going to give you some bread, and then we're going to give you some milk, and then we might give you a dessert or maybe a fruit. All of those things that I've mentioned are carbohydrates, right? So, and when you look at some of the school meals that we serve in the US compared to other places in the world, they're serving whole foods, not processed foods. So these are the things I think that we can start to help educate children to make a connection between you are what you eat, and there's consequences to what we eat.
Yeah, and a big piece of that, like you mentioned, is the education piece and sort of getting people more aware around how all of these different components fit together. And and this could also be an unconscious bias on myself, but so I grew up in an urban area, and I do think there was not a lot of connecting or not a lot of thought from some of my teachers that I could make those connections, like raising the expectation around what I could understand when it came to nutrition and what I was learning. And so I sometimes wonder if we don't think kids are capable of learning concepts around, they show us the pyramid, but they don't necessarily tell you, and this is how the pyramid is going to the food pyramid. And this is how the food pyramid is going to relate to other aspects of your life. Like many things that you're taught in school around nutrition and eating and healthy behaviors, sex education, mental health, exercising, they all seem to be siloed. And it's the same way we teach adults, right? Like we don't necessarily make connections and say, well, to be healthy, you have to have a good environment, like you have to have good air, or you have to have water. These seems like basic things, but we don't talk about how, all of these things connect. And so you talked about prevention, and part of prevention is getting people to understand these connections and giving them the basic education they need to do that. So when we think about equity and health, some of the things that we've seen shifting are mental health education in schools, sex education shifting or changing, or the curriculum shifting. What do you think could be the impact, or why would it be important to really start looking at education in schools when it comes to the health topics? Like, because I know some funding has been sort of pulled away as we look at academic progress and technology in schools.
Well, again, I say that schools are tasked with more responsibility for our children than they have been in the past. And I'm not saying that it's fair. I'm just saying that's what it is. I think during the COVID pandemic, when schools could not accept children, we understood how much the importance of schools to, and their connection to our economy. People couldn't go to work, right? So they are tasked with they spend more time often with our children than the parents do on a given day, right? And so I think there's an opportunity and a necessity for them to look at who they are educating in a holistic way. When you talk about things like exercise, a study was done in Texas of requiring children to exercise daily. They did it for about 3 years, and the outcomes were not what they had expected, and partially due to things like bullying. When you exercise, then you go to the locker room. It's not supervised, so then there's bullying. If you're obese or if you're not athletic, children started to experience those things, and so they were more absent, or they had more disturbances in their behavior, right? But again, when let's look at exercise and not just say, okay, it's a sport or it's a push up, but it could be yoga, it could be walking, it could be dance, it could be anything, but instilling in these children that it's necessary for you to move. When we start to talk about bullying, the statistic, the CDC came out, I think this year, that said 57% of girls and 69% of gay, lesbian, bisexual teenagers reported feeling sadness every day for at least 2 weeks during the previous year. 14% of girls and up from 12% in 2011 said they had been forced to have sex at some point in their lives, as did 20% of gay, lesbian, and bisexual adolescents. You cannot talk about health and wellness without talking about sexuality and the impact of that, and being able to have a safe place where our children can have real discussions about what's going on with them. We talk about our mental health and wellness, and we know how important it is because of COVID. But we have to, we cannot bury our heads in the sand. We have to, and when you then start to talk about, pregnancy rates with teenagers, that's a health issue. 20, I think 25, 28% in the 20s for Latinos and African American young girls. That's a health issue that also turns into an economic issue, because young kids having kids tend to live in poverty, which creates a whole other impact on health, where you live, green spaces, air quality, water quality. So it's really, like I said, there is an opportunity, I think, starting it with education, to really educating kids to be healthier, a generation of healthier citizens.
And so I just want to also point out one of the things as I was listening to you talk, you mentioned having like honest conversations and being open. It seems like instead of shifting towards that, we are in some ways um, kind of taking away schools' ability to do that, taking away their ability to engage in dialogue with students and children. And it's so interesting. And I think you and I had a conversation about the fact that during COVID, we realized how much the schools did when it comes to into did when it comes almost into the arena of raising children, right? And
Yes.
setting that foundation. Yet
Hmm.
after we were no longer isolating, we almost went in, and once the kids were back into school, said, okay, like we want you to do less, even though we know you've been doing more and we know you've been lifting a lot of this. And then we were kind of surprised when, you know, health issues started to become crisis level with kids in this age range. So like that mental health wasn't doing great, and kids were even worse than they were prior to pandemic. Like when you look at some of the statistics, I can't imagine why we would shift to something so illogical, right? Like it almost seems like we're moving away from prevention. Like kids are in school, how many hours? What, 8, 10 hours? And if you include commuting and working, adults, we often talk about how you spend more time in the workplace than you may at your home. How come we don't think about kids in the same way? How come we aren't sort of focusing on how to improve that big bulk of time that they spend in schools to give them a little bit of that emotional and critical thinking skills that they may need, not necessarily in academics, but in the care of ourselves that, maybe, and I don't want to say parents don't have time to do this, but just looking at how much time you actually have to like spend working, that parents may need some community assistance on. Like, why don't we focus on that? And I don't expect you to have the answer to this, but I know you have
I,
some thoughts on this.
yeah, I don't think it's a priority. The way that we have to stop to even think our schools healthy places for our students to be, right? You know, when you talk about the fact that each day 12 children die from gun violence, that there have been 377 mass shootings since Columbine. Over 300,000 students have been experienced some sort of gun violence, right? When you stop to think about even things like what time do kids have to start to attend school, right? During adolescence, during that time, children's bodies need more sleep. They actually, biologically, they sleep later, they go to bed later, they need more sleep, but our starting times are not are super early, not conducive to having a healthy circadian rhythm. Stop to think. Over the years, we have learned that having a sedentary life is an unhealthy life. So what do? We take children and we put them in chairs for how many hours a day to be sedentary, and now they're becoming obese. We're not feeding them well, right? I don't. We're not feeding them well. They're not getting the proper amount of exercise. They're living in unhealthy communities. So I think that we have this problem because we're not educating kids, and kids are. Here's the funny thing about children: they're great at teaching their parents. And I'll give you an example. If you've ever tried to implement a swear jar in your house, like anytime you say a bad word, you got to put a quarter in the swear jar, right? Let one slip, and the kid will be the first one to say, "Mommy, Daddy, you just said it, you better put something they'll remind you. But if we start to teach our children, when someone pulls out a bottle of soda, that they say, you know what, we drink water at school because in our community, obesity leads to diabetes and heart disease. Mama, doesn't grandma have high blood pressure? Right? They start to connect to their real lives, and they'll school their parents on, no, that we shouldn't really be doing this. I think that we need to arm our children with real knowledge that really helps them to make choices and decisions that are going to lead them to healthy, happy lives. And if we can really pay attention to what we're eating, how much exercise we're getting, and making these healthy habits a day-to-day, healthy habit. Whole foods, taking green spaces in our school and creating gardens so that children can learn how to grow food organically, something that many poor communities can't afford. Right. So I think there's a real missed opportunity to educate our children because they have the capacity to learn and to prevent diseases that are now starting earlier in their lives because of obesity.
Melania, thank you so much. This has been such an insightful discussion. And if people want to work with you or find out more information or just like, kind of, I know you work with a lot of organizations, nonprofits, and organizations in the New York area. If they want to get in touch with you, how can they reach you? Um,
You can reach me at B Smart Coaching, and that's BSMART coaching.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, or you can call me directly at 716-874-1819.
Thank you so much for being our guest today. And I admire everything that you do. And I'm so glad you were able to join us today and have a discussion about health and, the education system we have and, some ideas and things that we can do to improve equity and access. When it comes to pre-K to 12th graders and our school systems. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I am a fan of yours. You already know that. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
It's like a love fest at the end.
It is.
And listeners, if you didn't have a chance to write down what was said, we will also have it on our page, how to reach out and, connect. Uh, Thank you and have a wonderful day until our next episode.
Thank you.